It's Electric Drives. Your electric vehicle future starts right now. Welcome to the show. I'm Anthony Algmin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Bob Reese. We created the show to make it easier for others looking to move to electric vehicles, and that's more and more people every day. We're out there using EVs in normal commutes and road trips, and we'll share the wisdom we've gained from living our lives with electric vehicles. You can join in the conversation by sending us your questions and topic ideas, by joining our Facebook group, or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/electric drives to get more content and help support the show. We're here to share and learn together and reduce the confusion we have when transitioning from gasoline to electric vehicles. So let's get started. Bob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good, real good.
Awesome.
Preparing for a couple of long trips later this week.
Oh, nice. We'll have some more stories too.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about the charging etiquette that we need to have when we're out in the world, especially at DC fast charging stations like Electrify America or EVgo or even the Tesla superchargers. So what is our charging etiquette? And we're going to hear some adventures that you've had because you're doing this, like we say in the intro, you're doing this every week and you're out there interacting with the world, and you've got some great stories to share with us. So let's cover some of the basics and we'll get into the some of the stories as we go. But first and foremost, because you're driving, a fair amount of miles, and under most circumstances, we're now at a point where you have some choice, at least some of the time, in terms of which charging stations, which banks of chargers you're going to choose to go to. So when you're on one of your trips, how do you make the determination of where you're going to stop? What are the kinds of things that you're thinking about or you're looking at, or the tools you're using to try to figure out, okay, where do I want to plan my stops for this particular leg of my journey?
Well, a lot of people use a better route planner to plan their charging stops. So it lays out, it can give you alternate routes to go to a destination. Say if you're driving from Chicago to Disney World or something like that, it'll give you a route and give you suggested stops and so on. I personally am just using the auto manufacturer's app because it ties into the car computer. So it gives me real-time information and alerts me saying, hey, you're going to have to extend your visit at the next charging station, or, it's going, there's some questionability. Now, I read some interesting things about some of the Tesla ones where it tells you to reduce your speed so that you can make it to the next charger with minimum issues of charging.
I was going to ask you about that. Does your car, I know some of the newer cars are using the built-in navigation. If you have selected that you're going to go to a charging station, that it then conditions the battery so that when you arrive at that station, it's in optimal form to charge. I know not all of them are doing that yet, but that definitely is one reason why you might choose to use a manufacturer's navigation on your trips.
Right.
Yeah.
My car's not that sophisticated, and hence it's one of the cheapest cars out there.
Right.
I've seen the benefits of having that because I was going to a charger in central Iowa, and I was at the charger and I was charging at about 20 kilowatts charging speed, and a Porsche pulled up, and they had preconditioned before they got there, and they hooked up and they were pulling over 110. So their charging speed was much faster because the car was able to say, okay, we're going to that charger, we better start getting the battery up to the temperature so it can be most efficient as far as charging.
So when you're determining, so some of these apps will give you some insight into whether or not all of the banks are full. If all the chargers are full, they're probably not always reliable. But I assume you're using that to determine, okay, how important is it to you typically to get to a place that has relatively high numbers of open charging stations versus, I imagine you might be looking at places that have good food options or places to shop or places to use the restroom and things like that. Like, what other things are you thinking about?
Well, I do tend to use, if I'm using Electrify America, it lets me know how many are occupied and how many are
Hmm.
available. So I can plan that way and just watch that as I'm going to the stop.
Hmm.
I believe the Tesla does it a little bit better, where it looks at the whole world of cars and which ones are going to the one in Davenport, Iowa, for instance, and how
Hmm.
many cars are on the way, so it can give an idea of what charging speeds it can farm out to the various cars that are going to that location.
Makes sense. And so, say you get to your destination, whatever you've chosen to, between what you've done in your manufacturer app and about a route
Right,
planner
right.
and PlugShare obviously is another resource to give you an insight as to whether or not the charging station's online, or even that there may be new ones that have popped up since the last time you were in the neighborhood. Um, Once you get to whatever one you've selected, what do you do if all of those charging stations are occupied, or say two are occupied and two are broken? How do you manage that situation? And is there an etiquette to waiting in line? Can you wait in line at a charging station like that?
Oh yeah, you can wait in line, and or I might go to one that's the one in Bloomington Normal. There's an Electrify America that is notorious. The charger is notorious for not being able to charge with a credit card, and some of the apps don't work with it. But for some reason, I can open it from my app and utilize it.
Hmm.
So I'll take a look and see if there's one available and go for it. But generally, when I'm driving there, I always go to the slowest charger, because my car does not charge at 150 or 350. It's much slower. So out of respect, I free those up for the guys that can charge much faster. And I almost never consider going and hooking up. Usually there's a pair of chargers on Electrify America, and on the Chatamos, they'll have one Chatamo and one CCS,
Mhm.
and so you can go to the CCS. But if other CCSs are available, I'll go to them, even if it is a 150 or a 350,
Mhm.
and leave the Chatamo for the Nissan Leafs and some of the other cars that would need that kind of a charger.
Right. So so the takeaways here are, if your car can't handle it, you don't get benefit from going even higher on
Oh yeah,
the wattage. Don't be that person. Don't be that person who uses the one connector and blocks the one connector that the other cars really need, if you can avoid it. You know, obviously
right.
don't leave it open and not charge at all if you have an option to charge, but try to avoid that. And then the other one I would add, and this is not really as important at the fast charging locations, but at especially like level 2 chargers, where you have maybe three or four chargers kind of all in a row with two cords coming out of each one, or two uh chargers sharing the same power supply. It's kind of urinal rules. Like, go as far away from people as you can, because you may find that some of the power supply for that is shared and may cut the wattage in half. I know at my work, that's what happens. There's two charge point supply units, and they're level 2 chargers, and if both of the plugs are used, the speed of charge is in half of what it would be if
Correct.
you're the only one on that particular machine. So just be aware that that can impact that. But it's generally, just use common sense, kind of like what you would have at a gas station. Like, don't just park there if you're not charging. If you're charging, be cognizant if there's people waiting in line, and if you
Yeah.
don't need to get extra charge, then go about your business and move on. That's another question that I have for you, Bob. So say you're trying to charge and you're trying to get as much as you can right now because it may impact where you can make it to the next stop or what have you. What is the kind of rule when people are waiting? What percentage should you charge to, or what factors do you want to use to know, okay, when do I get, get out of here so the next people can use this?
Well, using the same example, 2 weekends ago, I was shopping at Meyer, and they have 4 Electrify America chargers there. They have a Chatamo CCS combination charger, and then they have 3 other CCS chargers available. And they're all at the same speed. They're all at 150. So it's sort of like, well, I can just pick one of those. Well, when I pulled in, there was a white Bolt that was parked on the Chatamo CCS charger. No other cars in the parking lot, or nobody else charging. And I could tell by looking at the screen on at the front of the charger that he was pretty full.
Hmm.
And he's at around 80%, maybe a little bit higher. But I just pulled into one of the other chargers, went inside, used the restroom, did some shopping, came out, and there were two other cars had pulled up in the meantime, and there was a car waiting. Mm-hmm. Now, I would have liked to have waited a little bit longer and brought my car up to a higher charge, because I was going to be going on the road, and I try to get as much charge as I can, but I had enough to make it to my next stop in Iowa. Mm-hmm. So I pulled off and let that guy come on and charge up, and the guy in the white Bolt, never came back. Mm. So it was like rather inconsiderate, because on some of those chargers, especially on Electrify Americas, it'll give you a text warning saying, hey, you've reached 80%. Mm-hmm. Now, when we first started this discussion a few weeks ago, we talked about it was like filling up a swimming pool, and you use the fire hose to get the initial charge going into the car, and as it gets full, then you switch to the garden hose, and then eventually you switch to a bucket, or maybe just use a beaker or something to add water to the pool type of thing. So to get your first 80% takes a certain amount of time. Going from 80 to 100 can many times take that same amount of time. So it's just a waste. And as such, Electrify America gives a notification saying, hey, you've reached 80% of your charge. You can go all the way if you want, but your speed's going to be dropping here. Mm-hmm. And I've seen other cars in particular even drop it below that. And sometimes it's a matter of how the person has their setup, whether they go 75% or maybe they go 85 or 90%, and they won't go beyond that point. Mm-hmm. Again, to maintain a little cushion on the top side, and it does end up being respect for the fellow drivers that are trying to use chargers.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there are some tools that are available. I'm just thinking there's some queuing tools, like at my work, they had a thing with the charge point that's allowed you to say, hey, I want to join the waiting list for this. And it'll text you when that becomes available. And then you have the opportunity to do that. And it will know too, like if you stop charging, then you will start to incur overage fees or other things that were like, especially my early days of owning an electric vehicle, I was worried because the setup at my office was such that you could charge at a very reasonable rate until you're full. But when you stop drawing current, that charge point charger knows it, and the clock starts ticking. And so you have a half an hour to get your car off of that before they charge you like $12 because you're hogging the thing. And I'm like, this is fine, except for the fact that I'm in meetings and I've got stuff going on, and I'm like, I don't know if I can get out there without any warning. So I had to really watch it and say, okay, when can I find time in my schedule where I've got enough charge to make it back home, but I also need to, manage that in the workday as well. And so that's a pretty complicated scenario, because a lot of times you're charging and just waiting, or you're at a restaurant, or you're shopping or something like that, and being able to bounce out and move your car if you had to isn't that big of a deal.
Hmm.
But it's just thinking about, like, this is a whole different world, because you're usually, when you're charging, you're doing something else, and that's, you're inside shopping, or you're having a meal, or you're you're in your Tesla, you're playing video games on your screen, and whatever it is. But you are doing something else to occupy that time. The ideal is when you're like sleeping and you're in your hotel or what have you, and
Yes, right, right.
that's a the one other complication. So we've covered a lot of the basics around the EV charging etiquette. One of the things that I would like to talk about is that the full, we focus a lot of this, especially with the fast charging, we're focused on the pure electric, battery electric cars, but there's
Right.
also quite a few and a growing number of plug-in hybrids out there that are also able to charge at these charging stations, especially the level 2 chargers. What is there anything specific to those that we should be thinking about, or what have you? And like, I'm not even going to bother with the full, like, the internal combustion cars that just it's called icing. The ICE
Hmm.
is internal combustion engine, and that's when
Right,
one of
right.
these jerks just pulls into the charging station just to block it, because they're horrible people, and there's not really much to say beyond that. They know what they're doing. They're parking there because it's, they want to be antagonistic. It's usually something obnoxious, and you know what, that's how it is, because people are the worst. So that's, we're not even going to bother with analyzing that. It's just, that's something that will inevitably happen from time to time, and you deal with the horrible people and you move on. But when it comes to these plug-in hybrids, they're kind of in this middle ground. What do they do? Like, how do they know what to do? Because really, technically, they never have to charge. They could keep going with their gasoline as long as they want, but it's nice to
Right.
charge. So how should they manage it?
Well, then it sort of gets into almost first come, first serve, where, they can, they're free to charge. I mean, there's no rule against them. But try to be considerate of other people. I mean, just don't camp out there for 8 hours a day. I'm thinking there's a hospital that put in charging stations, and you could tell it was the doctors would park there and go in for a whole shift, because that same car would be there all day long.
Mm-hmm.
So rather inconsiderate when they have other options. I can understand that, hey, they're saving lives and so on. They can't get out of
Mm-hmm.
surgery to come and move their car or whatever, but still, it's rather inconsiderate.
Yeah, I get that the Porsche Cayenne hybrid, turbo hybrid owner also would prefer to not use any gasoline if they can, but you
Right.
maybe don't want to hog one of the two available options for everyone the entire day. Like that, it's, I don't know. To me, it's just saying, hey, you recognize you have other options, and right now we're at a state where there's just not enough charging opportunities for folks yet. They're not as ubiquitous as gas stations, and we have to kind of work together to
Right.
help
Right.
everyone do that. And that's one thing that inspires me about the way you approach how you go out into the world and charge that. Like, you were the better person for leaving, when, even though you really could have used that extra charge, and I'm guessing most of the other people couldn't, or just wanted it, you moved on and freed up that spot when somebody else was waiting. And I think that if we can all be like that, and can all try to not block each other, and all kind of work together, realizing we're all still early adopters to this whole thing, it would be very useful and good to help that community grow. And so I think one of the things that I want to hear a couple of your stories before we go today, about interactions you've had out there, because I know you've talked to a lot of different people at these fast charging stations, and I know you've helped a lot of people deal with challenges getting their apps to work, or their credit cards to work, or you were
Yes.
telling me a story before we went on here, around a Rivian that you had encountered out there. Can you tell us one or two of your stories from out in the field, so people can get a feel for what it's actually like when you're out there encountering others in public like that?
Well, I had stopped, I had been driving from Chicago to Des Moines, Iowa last Sunday, a week ago Sunday. And I usually stop at a charger in Davenport, Iowa, that has a lower price per kilowatt than many of the other chargers in that particular area. It's a third to half the cost of some of the other chargers around. And I stopped there, and I had to wait a little bit because there was it's two chargers that go. They're rated 150, and there was a Mustang and a Rivian that was charging, but the Rivian driver was complaining that he wasn't getting the speed that he's normally been getting as far as charging speed. And I said, well, I know and he was headed back to either Nebraska or to Colorado. I've forgotten which, but he had enough charge, and he didn't realize it, that he could make it to Williamsburg, the Electrify America chargers there, which I knew they had 4 chargers there, and a couple of them were rated 350. So it'd be much faster for him to just stop there, charge while using the restroom or eating dinner, and then go on from there for another leg of his journey. So he had pulled off the charger in Quad Cities because it just was not charging fast enough to his liking. And he proceeded to go to the one in Williamsburg, and I caught up with him at the one in Williamsburg. He had waited for 2 cars to finish charging because 2 of the chargers were down. And he had only waited about a half hour or so for them to finish charging. And he just could not get his car to charge. And I said, well, this is kind of weird. Maybe it's a problem with the chargers, even though you had just had 2 guys come off the chargers.
Yeah.
He says, I really need to get going. I said, well, I know there's some in just to the east of Des Moines that have been really reliable. They're brand new chargers. And why don't you try those? Because he had more than enough range to make it there. So he went to those. I physically followed him to those chargers to make sure he found them and see how it would go getting set up and so on. And for some reason, it rejected his credit card. It rejected the connection, the whole 9 yards. It was like totally bizarre. And I've used those many times because it turns out it's a free charger. That, again, using PlugShare, I knew it was a free charger. And it's a brand new charger, and I think they're just trying to generate interest in that area for electric vehicles. And he couldn't get it to start up for love or money. So I said, well, let's see now. So I brought my car over. I didn't need a charge because I generally try to arrive at motels with about 10% charge on my car so that overnight I get it fully charged.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let me try it. So I brought mine over, hooked it up, started right up. So then he called Rivian, and they had him reboot the car, which was kind of an interesting process. And I know I've heard about Teslas having to be rebooted too.
Yeah. And
there's a certain procedure you have to do to it. It reminds me of your initial adage about some of the electric vehicles were iPads on skateboards. Because
specifically the Teslas.
Because they've gotten to be so dependent on software that sometimes that's all it takes is a reboot to get everything refreshed and go forward. Yeah. So he was in the middle of the second rebooting of it because I guess he had done the first one wrong. Additionally, I found out that Rivian had it set up where if you had 4 failures for it to charge, it would lock itself out. Not sure if there was an issue with the charger or with the car. So I wanted to get some type of resolution before it would allow you to reboot, or it would allow you to go forward. So he mentioned it to them and mentioned that he had tried the Electrify America, 80 miles down the road, and he couldn't get that one to work either. And they checked the background on all those and said, well, it appears to be the car. Let's show you how to reboot it. And I don't know exactly what happened because I was getting tired. And since I arrive at the hotels with 10% charge, and there's only a couple chargers at the hotel, and it was also State Fair week, I knew that the hotel was oversold. So I wasn't sure if there'd be competition for the 2 Tesla destination chargers they have. And as it turned out, I was the only car using the destination charger both nights that I was there. In the Quad Cities, by difference, that destination charger is a shared charger. And it's been kind of bizarre because I came in Tuesday night of that week and plugged in, and it said I'd be done by midnight, but then a Tesla came in and used the other charger, and by splitting it off, we were both done about 6 o'clock in the morning.
And in case anybody out there is like, what? He is using a Tesla charger? Is that allowed? Well, yeah, you could actually get an adapter for those Tesla destination chargers. Called a Tesla Tap is the most common one, and it will allow you to change your connector plug, adapts it to the Tesla plug that they have on those destination chargers, and it works great, except for those rare occasions where the destination charger is coded to only accept true Teslas, which fortunately isn't usually the case, but sometimes you got to know the Tesla destination chargers are not always reliable because they can be coded to wait and recognize only for Teslas. So something to keep in mind. So
the owners of the hotels like to have it open for everybody, because otherwise they're going to be turning around Porsches and all kinds of other vehicles that could be using the chargers.
Well, and people
and they're paying for the electricity anyhow. So,
and you're going to irritate good customers that are staying there trying to use your charging station, and chances are those often go unused. So anybody who can charge there is generally welcome to. So we're way over time, but hopefully you found this conversation useful, picked up some tips, thought a little bit about what it's like to charge out in the field. So that wraps up our show for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that YouTube bell icon. Send your questions and topic suggestions to questions@electricdrives.us. If you'd like to get special content and help support the show, please join us on patreon.com/electric drives. Thank you for spending some time with us, and we wish you a smooth road ahead on your own electric drives. Thanks, everybody.